The morning my mother told the bank manager I had never built anything worth keeping, she was wearing my late grandmother's diamond cross and smiling like she had buried me. By sunset, every account tied to her family business was frozen, my brother was screaming in the parking lot, and the woman who called me useless was pounding on my apartment door begging for help I could refuse. She still did not know the part. I was not the daughter she had underestimated. I was the audit trail. Before I tell you how that door ended up shaking under her fists, tell me where you are watching from. If you have ever been treated like the disposable child until the truth needed a witness, press like, subscribe, and stay with me, because what my family did for years did not just wound me. It built the case that brought all of them down. I grew up in coastal North Carolina, in a white house with blue shutters, polished antiques, and the kind of silence that only exists in families obsessed with appearances. My mother, Lorraine, ran our family accounting firm like a private kingdom. She had perfect hair, a voice sharp enough to cut glass, and a permanent way of looking at me, like I had arrived as a clerical error. My older brother Grant was her golden son. He was loud, reckless, and permanently forgiven. He wrecked cars and got handed new keys. He missed deadlines and got praised for his instincts. He flirted with clients' assistants at company dinners, and mother called it charm. When I corrected an entry in a ledger as a teenager, she told me I had the social warmth of a stapler. I was the daughter who noticed things. That made me useful in private and unwelcome in public. My father had died when I was in college. Officially, he had left the business years earlier because of stress. Unofficially, he and mother had been fighting about money, missing funds, and what he once called cooked books dressed up in church clothes. I did not understand what that meant at the time. I understood it later. After his death, mother tightened her grip on the firm and on everything else. She controlled family narratives the way other people managed calendars. At reunions, she would tell relatives that Grant was carrying on the legacy while I was still trying to find myself. Never mind that I had a finance degree, a spotless work record, and a side consulting business that was actually growing. Never mind that Grant only showed up when his title could be printed on something glossy. The first real crack appeared when grandmother Evelyn died. She had raised me in all the ways my mother had not. She packed my lunches when mother forgot. She sat in the front row at my graduation while mother took a call in the hallway. She once told me in a whisper while kneading biscuit dough that families do not always protect the right child. Sometimes they protect the loudest liar. At the funeral, mother cried the right amount for public consumption. Grant hugged people with one arm and checked his phone with the other. I stood near the casket and noticed mother wearing grandmother's diamond cross before the will had even been read. That detail sat badly with me. 2 weeks later, mother summoned me to the office. Not invited, summoned. The family firm operated from a renovated brick building downtown, all dark wood and framed certifications. The front conference room had frosted glass walls, which meant everyone could see silhouettes, but not expressions. Mother loved that room. It let her stage authority. When I walked in, Grant was already there, feet up on a leather chair, smirking. Mother slid a folder across the table. Grandmother updated her estate plan before her decline, she said. The business property and the investment accounts are transferring under a family continuity structure. Grant will supervise. You, of course, are not equipped for operational control. Not equipped. That was her phrase when she wanted to humiliate me in language polished enough to avoid criticism. I opened the folder. The papers looked official at first glance, but the signatures felt wrong. Grandmother's hand had trembled in her last months, but not like that. The slant was off. The spacing was too even. The witness line carried the name of a paralegal I had never met. Then I saw the line that turned my stomach. A power of attorney supposedly executed 6 months before grandmother died, granting mother broad authority over asset transfers, account access, and business restructuring. Grandmother had told me very clearly that she would never sign a power of attorney giving mother unrestricted financial control. She had trusted her with social obligations, not with money. Your mother spends loyalty like credit, she once said. I do not hand her both keys. I looked up, mother read my face and smiled. If you are about to become emotional, spare me, she said. Your grandmother knew who could preserve this family. Grant laughed. Do not start with your little suspicions. Not everyone who succeeds is committing a crime. That was the moment my anger sharpened into something cleaner. I asked for copies. Mother refused at first, then relented with the expression of a queen tossing scraps to a servant. I left with the folder and the feeling that I had just been shown a threat disguised as paperwork. 3 days later, my own bank account flagged a strange transfer attempt. It was small, almost laughably small compared to estate money, but it was routed through a holding company tied to one of the firm's shell entities. I knew that name because I had once seen it buried in an old vendor reconciliation prepared by a staff accountant who quit abruptly. I pulled everything I could from public filings, archived email threads from when I briefly freelanced for the firm years earlier, and county property records. The pattern was ugly. Properties had been revalued downward before internal transfers, then leveraged upward for loans. Maintenance expenses were inflated. Vendor payments went to companies with no meaningful operating history. One trust linked to grandmother's estate had been emptied in stages and then replenished with incoming funds from unrelated client accounts, as if someone expected nobody to look too closely as long as balances appeared healthy at quarter close. Fraud is rarely cinematic at first. It is boring on purpose. It hides in columns, fees, revisions, amended signatures, and the confidence of people who believe no one will challenge them. What turned suspicion into certainty was a stack of archived statements I found in a mislabeled storage box at the office annex. I was not even supposed to be there. An old receptionist, Donna, let me in because she had known me since childhood and still called me sweetheart. In the back room, beneath old tax binders and dusty monitor stands, sat boxes from the year grandmother first began stepping back from active control. Inside one box, I found duplicate statements showing transfers into an account number that did not match the estate records mother had shown the family. Another folder contained handwritten notes from my father, question re-asset diversion. Lorraine moved without consent, and on one yellow page, if anything happens to me, Marin must see this. That was the first time I cried. Not because I was weak, because a dead parent had just reached through paper to warn me that the betrayal was older than I knew. I took photos of everything. Then came the humiliation that made it personal in a way even theft had not. At Sunday dinner, in front of my aunt, two cousins, and Grant's new fiancée, Mother announced that I had always been dramatic about money because I resented not being chosen to help run the family business. She told them I had invented irregularities because I could not handle being less necessary than I imagined. Less necessary. Grant added that I was the kind of person who mistakes competence for importance. They laughed. Actually laughed. I looked around that table and saw something devastating. Nobody defended me. Not because they believed Mother completely, but because family comfort mattered more to them than family truth. That is how rot survives. Not through evil alone, but through polite spectatorship. Then Mother said the line that stayed with me. You are always good at finding dust, Marin. That does not make you the owner of the house. I stood, set down my napkin, and told her she might want to review the chain of custody on grandmother's estate documents before insulting me again. For the first time all night, she looked uncertain. That uncertainty turned to panic the next morning when I filed a formal request with the probate court for document authentication review, submitted an anonymous complaint to the State Accountancy Board regarding possible fiduciary misconduct, and sent notice to the Bank Compliance Department that certain estate-linked accounts might involve forged authority documents and suspicious transfers. I did not do it impulsively. I did it precisely. By late afternoon, the bank had initiated a temporary freeze pending review. By evening, Grant was calling me a traitor. By nightfall, Mother was at my door, pounding hard enough to rattle the frame, demanding that I fix this family embarrassment before outsiders started asking questions. That was rich coming from the woman who had built her power by making me feel like an outsider my entire life. I opened the door only after she threatened to call the police on me for interference. Her lipstick was smudged. Her composure had cracks in it. Grant stood behind her in the hallway, red-faced and sweating. Marin, she said, and suddenly her voice was softer, almost maternal, which made my skin crawl. You do not understand the damage you are causing. I looked at her and finally saw it clearly. She did not come because I was her daughter. She came because I was the first person in years who had evidence she could not charm shame or silence. For once useless had become dangerous. The next 48 hours changed the family permanently. Once the accounts froze, people started talking. That is the thing about polished family businesses. They look invincible, right up until the first locked door, the first delayed payroll, the first banker who stops smiling and starts documenting. The State Accountancy Board acknowledged receipt of the complaint. The probate court granted preliminary review of the contested documents. Most important of all, the bank's fraud division requested supporting records. They did not care about Mother's reputation, her church board seat, or the framed charity awards in the lobby. They cared about signatures authorization paths, and whether the money trail matched the legal authority claimed. I gave them what I had: copies of the estate papers, photos of the archived statements, my father's notes, a timeline of suspicious transfers tied to shell entities and sudden asset reclassifications. I also submitted something Mother never expected me to have: an audio recording. Years earlier, when Grandmother's memory was beginning to slip in tiny, uneven patches, I started recording our recipe sessions with her permission because I wanted to preserve her voice. Most of those recordings were harmless and tender. Measurements, family stories, complaints about under-seasoned green beans. But one file recorded by accident while I was setting up my phone in her kitchen captured a conversation between Grandmother and Mother in the background. Grandmother said very clearly, "I told you no power of attorney, Lorraine. You do not get to move my property because you are impatient." Mother replied, "Then you are forcing this family into chaos." Grandmother answered, "What ruins families is greed dressed up as sacrifice." When I found that recording again, I sat on my couch in the dark and listened 3 times. Then I sent it to my attorney. Yes, I hired one. By then I understood that truth without structure gets buried by louder lies. My attorney, Naomi Pierce, was not warm in the conventional sense, but she had the calm energy of someone who does not blink when rich people threaten her. She reviewed everything and said 6 words I will never forget. They have exposure on multiple fronts. The first formal confrontation happened at the probate hearing. Mother arrived in cream silk and pearls as if elegance could cross-examine evidence. Grant came in looking angry enough to combust. 2 relatives sat behind them, not to support justice, to support the family brand. I sat beside Naomi, hands steady, throat dry. Mother's lawyer tried the expected angle first. He painted me as a resentful daughter with emotional grievances against a successful parent. He suggested that my independent consulting work had underperformed, that I felt excluded from family leadership, and that this petition was a retaliatory act triggered by disappointment over inheritance decisions. He was good. I will give him that. He made misogyny sound administrative. Then Naomi stood. She did not waste motion. She introduced the discrepancies between known signature samples and the contested documents. She highlighted the unlogged movement of estate-linked funds. She entered the recording. She introduced my father's notes not as proof by themselves, but as contemporaneous concerns that aligned with the financial irregularities later uncovered. Then she asked the court to consider why. If everything had been clean, the estate needed layered transfers through entities controlled by the same people claiming to protect it. You could feel the room shift. Mother's composure slipped when the judge asked whether she had exercised authority over any estate asset before formal probate instructions were completed. She answered too carefully. Grant made it worse. Outside the courtroom, he cornered me near the stairwell and hissed that I was destroying Father's legacy. I said no, I am proving what destroyed it. His face changed, not because he felt shame, because he realized I knew more than he thought. The hearing ended without a final ruling, but the judge ordered expanded review document examination and temporary restrictions on further asset movement. That alone was enough to send shockwaves through the family. By evening, Mother launched her counterattack. She sent relatives a long message claiming I had manipulated Grandmother in her vulnerable years, secretly recorded private family moments, and fabricated financial concerns to punish the family for not centering me. She said I was unstable, vindictive, and willing to humiliate the family publicly for personal validation. It worked on some of them. My aunt called to ask in a trembling voice whether there was any chance I had misunderstood normal accounting procedures. One cousin posted a vague message online about toxic daughters who weaponize old wounds. Grant's fiancé unfollowed me everywhere and then liked 3 posts about respecting mothers. For one brutal night, I lay awake wondering whether I had made a terrible mistake by taking private ugliness into public systems. Then Donna called. Donna had worked reception and records for the firm for more than 20 years. She had seen people come and go, seen staff cry in bathrooms, seen Mother praise loyalty right before discarding it. Donna said she had been reorganizing archived mail logs and found certified letters from one of the firm's oldest clients, questioning unexplained withdrawals from a managed reserve account. The dates matched the same period when grandmother's estate money began moving strangely. I met Donna in the parking lot behind a diner. She handed me copies she had kept because, in her words, I knew one day somebody honest would need them. Those letters were dynamite. They showed a pattern larger than family theft. It was not just that Mother and Grant had manipulated estate assets. They had apparently blurred client funds, internal reserves, and trust accounts in ways that exposed the firm to serious fraud allegations. The business was not merely mismanaged. It had been used like a personal reservoir by people who assumed titles gave them immunity. Naomi helped me package the new material for the appropriate investigators. That was when the public exposure truly began. A local business reporter caught wind of the probate dispute after a courthouse clerk, probably trying to sound informed over lunch, mentioned document challenges involving a prominent family firm. Within a day, an article appeared online. It was cautious but devastating enough. Regional accounting firm faces questions over estate control and financial irregularities. No names in the headline, names all through the body. My phone exploded. Former employees wrote to me privately. One said she had been ordered to backdate vendor approvals. Another said Grant routinely pressured staff to classify personal spending as business development. A third said Mother once made him revise account notations after a deceased client's trust statement showed unauthorized movement. I was no longer carrying suspicion alone. The truth was crawling out from every polished crack. The formal accusation came 1 week later at an emergency meeting of key clients and senior staff held because several accounts could not proceed under the existing signatory conditions. Mother had planned to control that meeting. I know because I saw the agenda in advance. Operational continuity, temporary banking inconvenience, malicious internal misunderstanding. She was going to turn an audit risk into a loyalty test. Naomi said I should attend. I walked into that conference room wearing navy with my hair pulled back and a binder so thick it looked like consequence made physical. Grant muttered unbelievable. Mother smiled at the room and introduced me as a distressed family member. Naomi stood and corrected her. My client is a documented complainant with submitted evidence relevant to fiduciary breaches affecting this firm and potentially its clients. Silence. Then I spoke. Not dramatically, not shakily, precisely. I explained that I had reason to believe estate documents tied to my grandmother were forged or improperly executed. I explained that account movements suggested unauthorized transfers, masked reclassification, and possible commingling of funds. I explained that multiple records now under review indicated a pattern, not an isolated clerical issue. Then I laid out copies, dates, statements, letters, internal inconsistencies, the recording transcript. You could actually hear breathing change around the table. One client, an older man who had trusted our family for decades, looked at Mother and asked, "Did you use reserve positions to patch internal gaps?" She tried outrage first, then sorrow, then offense. Classic sequence. Grant snapped that this was a family ambush staged by a jealous daughter. That was the moment he made the mistake that cracked him open. He said everybody moves things temporarily. We were going to put it back. The room went dead. Nobody had accused him of that exact act in that meeting yet. Naomi did not even smile. She simply said, "Thank you for the clarification." Mother turned toward him with naked fury. Not because he lied poorly. The client stood. One asked for all access rights to be suspended pending independent review. Another said his legal team would be in touch. A staff manager who had worked there for 15 years quietly removed her company badge and set it on the table like she was leaving a funeral. Mother looked at me as if I had stabbed her. What she still did not understand was this: I had not betrayed the family. I had refused to keep helping them betray everyone else. By that night, our family name was no longer attached to respectability. It was attached to investigation. And that was only the first collapse. The week after the client meeting felt like standing in the eye of something that had not finished forming yet. The first collapse had happened, but the consequences had not fully landed. That space, that dangerous quiet between exposure and outcome, was where everything could still turn. Mother stopped calling me directly. Instead, she communicated through carefully worded legal notices and messages sent through relatives who still believed loyalty meant obedience. Grant, on the other hand, alternated between rage and silence. He left me two voicemails, one threatening and one almost pleading, neither of which I answered. But outside the family, something unexpected began to grow. Allies. Not loud ones, not obvious ones, but people who had been waiting for someone to make the first move. Naomi became the center of that network. She coordinated with a forensic accountant named Elias Warren, a quiet man with a habit of pausing before he spoke, as if measuring the weight of every word. He did not care about family drama. He cared about patterns, inconsistencies, and the kind of financial storytelling that leaves fingerprints everywhere. Elias reviewed everything I had gathered and then asked for more. Not just what looks wrong, he told me. What was meant to look right. That changed how I approached everything. Instead of only focusing on suspicious transactions, I began mapping out the moments where the books appeared unusually clean. Perfect quarter endings, balanced accounts that resolved too neatly after irregular periods, vendor payments that aligned with reporting deadlines instead of operational needs. It was like looking at a painting and realizing the real story was hidden in the untouched spaces. At the same time, former employees started reaching out more openly. One of them, a junior accountant named Lila, agreed to meet in person. We sat in a crowded coffee shop where conversation blended into background noise. Lila told me she had been instructed repeatedly to adjust timing entries to avoid drawing attention to short-term discrepancies. They said it was normal, she whispered, that it was just smoothing things out, but it never stopped, it just got bigger. Another former staff member, Daniel, provided copies of internal emails where Grant pressured the team to expedite approvals for transactions that bypassed standard review. The tone was casual, almost joking, but the intent was clear. Do not get stuck in process when opportunity is moving, one message read. Opportunity. That word showed up everywhere. Mother used it when describing restructuring. Grant used it when pushing aggressive decisions. But when Elias mapped everything together, opportunity translated into one thing: control without accountability. Meanwhile, the investigation expanded. The state board requested formal statements. The bank's fraud division deepened their review. A regulatory inquiry into client fund management was quietly initiated. The pressure was building, and in the middle of it, I realized something that shifted the emotional weight of everything I was doing. I was no longer just reacting, I was leading. That realization came late one night when I sat surrounded by documents, emails, and timelines, and noticed how every thread now connected through me. People were sending information because they trusted me to use it. Naomi was structuring the legal path around what I uncovered. Elias was building the financial case on top of my findings. For the first time in my life, I was not the overlooked daughter. I was the one holding the truth together. But that kind of position does not come without cost. The family pressure intensified. My aunt stopped speaking to me completely. A cousin sent a message saying I had taken things too far, and that even if Mother had made mistakes, this level of exposure would destroy everyone. Destroy everyone. That phrase echoed in my mind, because it forced me to confront something uncomfortable. Was I destroying the family, or was I revealing that it had already been destroyed long before I decided to speak? The answer came in an unexpected way. Through my father. Elias had been reviewing older records when he found something buried in archived tax filings. A discrepancy tied to a year when my father was still involved in the business. At first, it looked minor, a reporting inconsistency that had been corrected in subsequent filings. But when we looked closer, it aligned with the same pattern we were seeing now. Asset movement, temporary balancing, reclassification. My father had not just suspected something, he had tried to stop it, and he had lost. That realization reframed everything. This was not just about my mother and my brother. This was about a system that had been built, protected, and enforced over years. A system that punished anyone who challenged it, including my father, including me. And suddenly the question was no longer whether I was going too far. The question was whether I was finally going far enough. The turning point came during a strategy meeting with Naomi and Elias. They laid everything out. We have enough to establish a pattern, Naomi said. But pattern alone is not always enough for decisive action. We need something that connects intent, execution, and awareness across all parties involved. Elias nodded. We need a moment where they knew exactly what they were doing and chose to do it anyway. A moment. A single point that tied everything together. That was when I remembered something I had almost overlooked. A private family meeting held months before grandmother passed, where mother insisted on finalizing future planning. I had not been invited, but I had arrived early that day and overheard part of the conversation from the hallway. At the time, it sounded like tension. Now it sounded like evidence. I went back through my files, and then I found it. A calendar entry saved from an old shared family account marking the date of that meeting. Attached to it was a brief note likely added by mistake. Discuss authority transition before decline becomes obvious. Decline becomes obvious. The wording was chilling. It suggested not just awareness of grandmother's condition, but a plan to act before anyone else could intervene. When I showed it to Naomi, she did not react immediately. She read it twice. Then she said, "This is what we needed." That note, combined with the recording, the financial records, and the testimonies, created something powerful. A clear narrative, not confusion, not misunderstanding, intent. And with that, we prepared for the next step, a formal escalation. But just as everything began to align, just as the network of allies strengthened and the case sharpened into something undeniable, something shifted. Subtly at first, then all at once. Because within that network of trust we had built, someone was about to break it. And when they did, it would not just slow us down, it would nearly destroy everything I had fought to expose. The betrayal did not come from where I expected. It never does. By that point, I had learned to anticipate resistance from my family. I expected manipulation, denial, even legal threats. What I did not expect was for the fracture to come from within the very group helping me build the case. It started with a delay, small enough to dismiss at first. Elias mentioned that one of the data sets he had requested from a cooperating former employee had not arrived. That was unusual but not alarming. People hesitate. People second-guess themselves. Then another delay followed. A key document, one that supported a chain of transactions linking the estate funds to a client reserve account, was suddenly unavailable. The person who had promised it stopped responding. Naomi noticed the pattern before I did. "Something is off," she said during one of our calls. "Information is slowing down at the exact moment we need it to accelerate." That was when I felt it. Not fear, recognition. Because I had grown up in a family where information was always controlled, always redirected, always shaped to serve whoever held power. And now that same pattern was appearing again, just from a different direction. We traced the communication paths. Who had access to what? Who knew which pieces of evidence mattered most? Who had recently changed their behavior? The answer led us to someone I trusted, Lila, the junior accountant who had first spoken to me in that crowded coffee shop. The one who had seemed nervous but sincere. The one who had provided early confirmation that internal manipulation had been happening. At first, I refused to believe it. "She would not do that," I said. Naomi did not argue. She just asked, "Are you certain?" I was not. We reached out to Lila again. No response. Elias checked the metadata on the files she had already provided. That was when he found it. Access logs showing that copies of those same documents had been opened, reviewed, and exported from a different system shortly after she sent them to us. A system tied to the firm. Tied to Grant. My chest tightened. "She gave them access," I said quietly. Or worse, she had never stopped giving them access. The full realization hit when Naomi received a notice from Mother's legal team. They referenced specific documents, not just generally. Precisely. They knew what we had. They knew how we had it. And they were ready. The next move came fast. Mother filed a formal claim accusing me of unlawfully obtaining confidential business records, violating privacy protections, and conspiring with former employees to damage the firm's reputation. It was not just a defense, it was an attack. And it was calculated. Because if they could shift the focus from financial misconduct to how the evidence was obtained, they could weaken everything. Discredit the process. Discredit me. And suddenly the narrative would not be about what they did. It would be about whether I had the right to expose it. That was the moment I understood how dangerous the betrayal was. This was not just a leak. This was a reversal. Grant called me that night. I should not have answered. But I did. "You always thought you were the smartest one in the room," he said, his voice calm in a way that felt worse than anger. "You built this whole case and you never once considered that people talk." I said nothing. He continued. "Lila needed her job back, needed protection. You offered her what a moral victory, we offered her stability. There it was. Not loyalty, not truth. Leverage. You traded truth for convenience," I said. "No," he replied. "We traded risk for control, something you still do not understand." The call ended there. And for a moment everything felt like it was collapsing. The case was compromised, our strategy exposed. The people I trusted were no longer fully reliable, and worst of all, the narrative was shifting from them to me. The following days were the hardest. Naomi worked to contain the legal damage, reinforcing that the evidence pointed to legitimate concerns and that whistleblower protections could apply. But it was complicated now, slower, messier. Elias grew quieter, more focused, but I could see the frustration in the way he moved through the data. I felt it too. That creeping doubt. Had I miscalculated? Had I trusted too quickly? Had I underestimated how far my family would go to protect themselves? The answer was yes, to all of it. And yet, even in that moment of defeat, something inside me refused to break. Because this was not new. I had been underestimated my entire life. Dismissed. Ignored. Told I was too much in the wrong ways and not enough in the right ones. And every time I had adapted, learned, grown sharper, this was no different. If anything, this betrayal clarified something I needed to understand. I could not rely on fragile alliances. I needed something stronger, something undeniable, something that did not depend on who stayed loyal, only on what was true. So while the case appeared to stall, while my family pushed their counterattack and the narrative blurred, I did the only thing left to do. I went back to the beginning. Back to the records, back to the patterns, back to the smallest details everyone else overlooked. Because somewhere in all of that, there had to be something they could not manipulate, something they had missed, something that would not just repair the damage, but end this completely. And I was going to find it, even if I had to stand alone to do it. Starting over did not feel dramatic. It felt quiet, almost disappointingly quiet. There was no surge of confidence, no cinematic determination. Just me sitting at my table again, surrounded by documents that now felt heavier because I knew how easily people could twist them. But this time I changed how I worked. I stopped chasing what looked suspicious. I started isolating what could not be altered. Elias supported that shift immediately. Find what they could not fake even if they tried, he told me. Something external, something independently verified. So I stepped away from internal records and focused on third-party confirmations. Bankroading confirmations, time-stamped transaction clearings, tax authority filings, insurance declarations tied to property valuations, anything that existed outside my family's control. That was when the pattern sharpened into something undeniable. There was a specific sequence of transactions tied to a property grandmother owned before her decline. According to Mother's version, the property had been transferred into a managed trust structure for long-term preservation, but external filings told a different story. The property had been temporarily transferred into a holding entity leveraged for a loan and then partially liquidated through a sale that did not appear in the estate disclosures. That alone was significant. But what made it decisive was the timing. The transfer occurred before the supposed power of attorney date, which meant one thing: they had acted without legal authority, and then tried to create the appearance of authority after the fact. When I showed Elias, he did not speak for several seconds. Then he leaned back and said, "That is it. That connects everything." Because it was not just fraud. It was premeditated restructuring built on false documentation. And once you prove that, everything else collapses with it? Naomi moved fast. We prepared a new submission structured tightly around this sequence. Not broad accusations, not emotional arguments, just a clear chronological chain. Unauthorized action, followed by retroactive justification, supported by falsified or manipulated documentation, and reinforced by financial movement that benefited specific individuals. There was no space left for interpretation, but what we still needed was reinforcement. Someone who could confirm that these actions were not just technically improper, but knowingly executed. That was when the new ally appeared. Unexpected, unplanned, and absolutely decisive. His name was Victor Hale. He had been a senior compliance consultant brought in by one of the larger clients who had quietly started their own internal review after the meeting. Victor was not connected to my family, which made him dangerous to them. He requested a meeting. We met in a neutral office space, the kind designed to feel professional without being personal. He listened more than he spoke as I walked him through the timeline. When I finished, he asked one question. "Do you know why they thought they could get away with this?" I answered honestly. "Because no one challenged them." He shook his head slightly. "No, because they structured it to survive partial exposure. If you only found one piece, it would look like an error. If you found two, it would look like mismanagement. But you found the sequence." Sequence. That word again. He then placed a folder on the table. Inside were independent audit flags triggered by client side reviews. Not public yet, not shared broadly, but real. They matched my findings. Exactly. Victor looked at me and said, "I can testify to this pattern." Not as family, not as conflict, as compliance failure with intent. That changed everything, because now the case was not just built from inside, it was validated from outside, and it was about to become unavoidable. The next hearing was nothing like the first. There was no attempt at charm this time, no polished narrative, no controlled messaging. Mother looked composed but thinner somehow. Grant looked restless, like someone who had started to realize control was slipping. Naomi presented the sequence, step by step, clean, precise, unarguable. Then Victor spoke, and when he did, the room shifted in a way I will never forget. He did not accuse, he explained how the structure had been designed, how the timing indicated awareness, how the layering of transactions suggested intent to conceal not just error, and most importantly, how the retroactive documentation failed to align with the actual execution timeline. It was not emotional, it was clinical, and that made it devastating. Mother tried to interrupt once. The judge shut it down immediately. Grant said nothing. For the first time since this began, he looked uncertain, not angry, not defensive, uncertain, because the story they had been telling no longer worked. There was no space left to reinterpret, no narrative left to control, just facts, connected, complete, and impossible to dismiss. When the session ended, there was no explosion, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet understanding in the room. This was over. Not officially yet, but functionally. And as I walked out of that building, I realized something I had not allowed myself to feel until that moment. Relief, not because I had won, but because I no longer had to prove that I was not wrong. The truth had done that for me, and this time it was not fragile. It was final. The collapse did not happen all at once. It unfolded in layers. First came the formal rulings. The probate court invalidated the contested documents tied to grandmother's estate. The supposed authority Mother had relied on was declared improperly executed and legally insufficient. Control over the estate was reassigned under supervised administration. Then came the regulatory consequences. The accountancy board suspended the firm's operating license, pending further disciplinary action. Investigations expanded into client fund handling, and several accounts were flagged for independent audit. The bank did not just maintain the freeze, they escalated it. Internal reviews turned into formal inquiries, and once that happens, it does not quietly disappear. Mother lost control of the business within weeks, not in a dramatic announcement, but in a series of quiet removals. Access revoked, authority reassigned, decisions made without her. The woman who had built her identity on control was now excluded from it. Grant tried to recover something. He made statements, blamed administrative complexity, suggested that rapid growth had led to oversight gaps. But without the structure they had built, without the documents to support their claims, his words had no weight. People were no longer listening. The final blow came when formal findings confirmed what we had already proven. Unauthorized asset movement, improper financial structuring, failure of fiduciary responsibility, and intentional misrepresentation. Justice did not look dramatic. It looked documented. It looked signed. It looked final. Mother did not come to my door again. Not after that. We saw each other once more months later in a setting neither of us controlled. She looked at me differently. Not with anger, not even with resentment, but with something quieter. Recognition. You really did this, she said. I held her gaze. No, I answered. You did. I just refused to ignore it. She nodded once. Not in agreement. In acceptance. We did not speak again after that. Grant disappeared from my life entirely. I heard things. That he was trying to start over somewhere else. That he blamed everyone but himself. That he still believed he had been treated unfairly. Some people never learn, and that is their consequence. As for me, the aftermath was not what I expected. There was no sudden sense of triumph. No moment where everything felt resolved. Because when you tear down something that has defined your entire life, even if it was built on lies, you still have to figure out what comes next. But I was not alone. Naomi remained in my life not just as an attorney, but as someone who respected the way I had held the line when it would have been easier to step back. Elias stayed in contact occasionally, sending me notes about new cases, always with the same quiet acknowledgement that what we had done mattered. Donna still called me sweetheart, and slowly something new formed. Not a replacement for my family. Something better. A chosen family, built not on obligation, but on truth, on respect, on the understanding that loyalty without honesty is just another form of control. I moved out of the apartment where my mother once stood pounding on the door, not because I needed to escape it, but because I no longer needed to define myself by what happened there. I built my own work, expanded my consulting, focused on helping businesses avoid the exact kind of failures my family had hidden. It felt different. clean, earned, and for the first time I understood something my grandmother had tried to teach me years ago. Family is not who protects you from consequences. It is who stands with you when you face them honestly. Before I end this, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where telling the truth meant risking everything your family expected you to protect? Would you have done what I did? Or would you have stayed silent to keep the peace? If this story made you feel something real, share your thoughts in the comments. I read more than you think. And if you believe that truth deserves a voice, press like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for staying with me through this. And wherever you are, I hope you choose honesty over comfort when it matters most.